Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the special council meeting of Thursday, December 7th, 2023. We will call the meeting to order at 9:01 a.m. I'll begin the meeting with our land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the Township of Kabamonagan is located on the Treaty 20 Mississauga territory in the traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to First Nations for their care for and teachings about these lands. May we honor these teachings. Before us, we have a unique agenda. We're going through the initial draft of the budget today. Can I look to council for approval of the agenda before us? Councillor Byrne, Councillor Natchoff, all in favor? That is approved. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. There is no closed session, so we'll move right into the budget discussions with our first presenter. Carla, would you like to approach the mic? And I'll hit my mic off. And if you hit that off and on, I think you've been here before, you know the process. Thank you, Carla.
Good morning. Yes, I know the process and it still doesn't seem to make it any less nervous. I thought there would have been a couple of board members here. I'm not sure, but thank you for being here. Next slide, Carly. There are quite a few slides, but some of them are just pass-through ones, and so I'll try and get through this as quickly as possible. So I'm going to cover a quick update, a very brief look at our strategic plan, and then on to our budget request. Next slide. And the next one. So to begin, I am here, of course, to talk about the 2024 budget. But before I get to that, I'd like to give a brief update on the 2023 activities of the board and our library. This quote comes from R.D. Lanke's "Bad libraries build collections, good libraries build services, great libraries build communities." He is an author and professor and an advocate of community libraries and the important role they play. I like to think that we are a great library connecting our community. The library's new tagline that you can see up in the corner of the screen is "Read, Learn, Connect." And that is what we are trying to do. And connection is a word you are going to hear many times in my presentation. Next slide. Where we are now. The Kabamonagan Libraries has always worked to meet the needs of our changing and growing communities, as well as offering a continuously growing collection of books and ebooks and e-resources. We provide access to technology for those who do not have it on their own. We offer a space for parents and children to connect, play, learn, and grow. New residents can come to the library to learn more about community services and supports. Older residents and vulnerable individuals can come to the library to connect with others, read stories, share ideas, learn a craft, or just have a cup of coffee and chat with someone new. Next slide. We are making connections. Now that the pandemic is over, we find that people are seeking ways to connect with others. We have been offering back to our movie nights, book clubs, a chess club, knitting clubs, cooking clubs at both of our branches, and they have been well attended. Our children's programming has also been extremely successful this year. We've offered innovative and exciting crafts, activities, and movies, PA day activities, March break, and throughout the summer. And we have seen consistent growth in the numbers of children and families who have participated. Next slide. This shows that when I created this presentation, we had welcomed 347 new patrons to the library this year. 42,000 items have been borrowed, that is physical and virtual, and we have seen an increase of 37% in participants last year over this year. No, this year over last year, sorry, backwards. Next slide. We have been working on our community outreach and our partnerships. We don't just wait for the people to come to the library. We are also going out to meet them at community events. This helps promote the library to residents who may not yet be familiar with our services or who may be new to the community. This year, we were the test site for a reciprocal borrowing agreement with the Peterborough Public Library. Someone with a card from Kabamonagan Libraries can take that card to Peterborough and register for an account without a non-resident fee anymore, and they can borrow physical material. If you want to use the online resources, you still have to pay to the Peterborough Library, but this is a great step forward, and they used our model to offer this out to other libraries in the county. Through our growing partnership with the Historical Society, we provided 2 afternoon programs this fall, focusing on the brochure that they have for their walking tour. It was a virtual tour up on our big screen in the library. It was really neat, and we had several people come. Next slide. I applied for grants this year, and we received grants in the value of $26,664. The community grant from the Kawartha Credit Union was used to increase diversity in the picture book collection. We know that our community is changing, and so we used that as our grounding and bought more material that people can see themselves in. We've been awarded a 3rd mini grant from the International Dyslexia Association of Ontario to purchase materials that support those with dyslexia, but are invaluable to teach all children how to read. The grant from the Ministry of Seniors and Accessibility is a project I called Collecting Our Stories. The focus of the grant is to help older adults avoid social isolation by providing multiple group activities at the libraries, where older residents gather to tell stories and recount histories. One of the most interesting ones that we've had so far, Clark Mayhew and Nancy Legg came in and talked about the history of FoodShare. I've worked in that building for 15 years with FoodShare being there, but hadn't known its 25-year history. So it was very interesting. And we are trying to capture that to go into the book that we are trying to put together from the stories that we are getting from the community. This grant covers 100% of the costs of this program. Activities are well underway and will wrap up in 2024 with the publication of the book with stories from our older adult community. Next slide. For this one, I took a picture that was from the original library downtown and a card that I found in our archival material that talks about overdues. I just thought it was interesting pictures that we don't see very often. In the past year, our board has also done a great deal of work. In January 2023, we welcomed a full new slate of board members with one exception. So we had to spend time getting to know each other and the operation of the library. Since then, the board has reworked and finalized the strategic plan to better align with the post-pandemic times. It created committees, including a marketing committee that is working to strengthen the profile of the library and to increase public awareness. The color scheme used in this presentation is indicative of the new color scheme and branding that the library is moving towards. Next slide. And actually can just move on to the next one. So as part of our reworking the strategic plan, which I know I teased about a couple of years ago, and then with a change of board, things sort of stagnated, but we are back working on it again. We shortened our vision and strengthened our mission that to try and come up with something that we feel aligns with the goals and direction of the library and the new board. Next slide. The next 3 slides show the strategic directions and goals that we have set out underneath them. In essence of time, I'm not going to go through them today. You can read them in your packages. And we will be coming back in the new year to deliver a presentation on the strategic plan. But the board wanted it included in this so that you have an idea of what we're looking at. It's not a big departure from what we had before. It's just tightening up the wording, changing the language to reflect the current economic climate, forges a path for the library, and the direction we will take for the next few years. So if you want to just pop to slide number 2, you can see the library is a nice busy place. Number 3. And that was Erin and me attending the BIA event in June. Next one. And again, sorry. It's much easier when I hold the clicker and can move things along. What's next for the CM libraries? While we have accomplished much in 2023, our work is not done. Our goal for 2024 is to ensure we continue to provide programs and services that our residents need and deserve. As you know, Cavan Monaghan is growing, not only in the number of residents, but in the diversity of population. Our residents are looking to the library to continue to act as a community hub for their connection to books, movies, equipment, information, and each other. These are needs we cannot ignore, and I'm hoping that with the support of the township, the library can continue in part to meet those needs. Next slide. Actually, and on to the next one. So for 2024, the library is requesting a 5% increase over our 2023 funding. So from 321,000 or up to 321,000, sorry, from 306,520 last year. And in our capital levy, currently it's sitting at 34,000. I'll go into those numbers a little bit more in the next slides. Like all organizations, the library has seen an increase in the cost of doing business. It costs more for salaries, for streaming services, for subscriptions, and to continue to add to our digital and physical book collections. In your package, I gave you a couple of pages which give more information than what I put on the slide here regarding the operating, the capital, and our reserves. So for our operating budget, our 2024 budget is $355,652 at the bottom. That looks like a decrease from 2023, but as I explained in that first paragraph, the original budget was $340,000, and then we received this special funding. So then that changes what the total budget looks like. I've outlined there that the increases, basically it's salaries with a 4% cost of living. We've decreased some of our expenses, and then I found it a little hard trying to figure out how to make the numbers work. There's a net increase to our non-levy portion of the revenues. And so that comes to an increase this year over last year, $15,377. On the, what is that, the right side of the screen, I gave a little bit of information there where some of these fill our strategic directions. Our surplus and rollovers will be addressed in next year's or in the next iterations of the budget. Next screen. By the end of October, the virtual branch has had more usage than any other year. And we've been running now for 10 years with virtual, like Libby, Overdrive, and these different services. This year, we are hitting higher numbers than we have ever seen before. And we are anticipating that this usage will continue. So that is part of the reason why there is a slight increase in our streaming services budget to support that new usage. Next slide. I wish capital budgeting could be simpler. I wish I had more concrete numbers. I am conferring with my colleagues across Ontario, the auditors, as well as consultants to determine a formula to see how much we can use each year from development charges. So far, there is no consensus on a formula. I will be bringing some suggestions to the library board, which we will use in our second budget submission. As for IT, I was optimistic that some of the purchases in our $7,000 request would be underway by now, but they are not, with the exception of iPads, and they have been purchased through the seniors grant and so do not reflect on our capital budget request from the township. I am glad, though, that I held off on making my IT purchases. I have spent the year watching how the computers in the library are being used, what the tech needs are, and it is very different now from before the pandemic. We still have a lot of people coming in to use our computers, but they're not all coming in at once. And so I'm having to rethink how many computers do we need for the public, where they need to be, what needs to be on them. And so this is work that I have been doing over the last 6 months and continuing to work on. This past Tuesday, I had a long conversation with Christopher Lee from the county IT department, which has led to some questions about whether or not it makes sense for them to manage our IT. Our services, our infrastructure is at a very different point than what they would normally take on as a client. The county ID department does not actually provide support to any libraries currently. Before we can move forward, we need to sit down with Christopher Lee and other interested parties, such as Ms. Pope and a few of the board members, to see where we can go with the IT arrangement with the county. As for the budget request, we will be rolling forward the unspent $7,000 from 2023 to 2024. And then we will revise the new request of $7,000 as we get into the second draft, after we've had that conversation with Christopher Lee. The last slide. For the final slide, I wanted to show the incremental growth in circulation of our physical and virtual materials. So this slide, the one before with the graph, was just our virtual material, which was hitting about 16,000 borrows. This year, we have 28,000 borrows so far of just our physical material. That has met all of the material that was borrowed last year, and we still have a month to go. So we are loaning more materials to our patrons. It's wonderful to see the libraries busy. I am proud of the library, my staff, and the library board, and the connections and difference that we are making in the community. Thank you. I don't know if you want, well, questions, and then I'm not sure if I'm supposed to go into the budget part or if that'll be further on in the report.
No problem, Carla. Thank you for that presentation. We'll take some questions now, and we'll see where it takes us. But I think being the first draft, and you alluded very transparently to some of the changes and the moving targets for the next iteration, but I'll look to council for questions. Deputy Mayor Huntley, and then we'll go to Councillor Barrett.
Through your chair to Carla, thank you for the presentation. And it looks like the library had a very busy year. I know I've seen you at many of the events along the way, so it's great. A couple questions. First question is the 7,000 you're putting away for the IT equipment. I wasn't quite sure whether that was a rollover of the 7,000 or you're asking for another 7,000.
Through you. Originally, I was asking for a new 7,000. I was optimistic that I would spend the 7,000 in this year, but that hasn't happened. And so I need to sit down with the tech plan with Christopher Lee, with other interested parties, and figure out what we need for 2024 to add, whether we need it or not, or just using that 7,000 if that's enough for 2024. So unfortunately, I can't give you a clear answer on how much I need right at this moment.
Fair enough. And a follow-up question on that too. Sure. Yeah, I guess the conversation with Christopher Lee, which you'd stated, that he didn't support libraries at this point, which makes sense. Obviously, the county doesn't have libraries, but I mean, it should be just IT support. It should be, irrelevant whether it's a library or a bus terminal, right? Like that computer's a computer. So I'd really be curious on why he thinks it would be something different, but I guess you're going to sort that out with Ms. Pope and whatnot as time goes on.
Christopher Lee came around to the library in April and did an audit of what we have as a part of the onboarding process. And because our system has been cobbled together over 25 years of this and that, there is a certain level that they need it to be at before they're willing to take over. I was somewhat under the impression that I could use them for procurement, but they won't purchase the materials and then just hand over the boxes to me, that they would be part of the whole deployment, and we're not at a point where they would want to be involved. And so they sent us a report on November 17th, based on this walk around that had been done in April that has quite a high dollar value on it. I have shown the report to the board members. It came in on the Friday night. Our board meeting was on the Tuesday, at which point I actually had COVID and therefore we had to meet by Zoom. So it's something that's still pretty new to us and had a lot higher dollar values in it than what we were expecting.
Yeah, and I can help fill in some of that as well. So we, as Carla mentioned, everything exactly right. We need to have a formal plan now that we've got it's kind of Christopher kind of did an audit of all of the IT components of the library. That's how they start any sort of takeover for support or any sort of matter involving county IT. So we were all, I think, pretty surprised and taken back at the level of sophistication they anticipated that and the amount of value of investment they were looking for, whether it's a unique server to the library for $25,000, which seems a bit excessive given the purpose and the not sensitive content that the library manages outside of, people's maybe addresses for their card that they utilize. So there's not a lot of sensitive materials. So we have literally just received that, I think 2-3 weeks ago now, and we haven't had time to dissect it or meet with staff, obviously, because staff are doing their own components of the budget. So I don't think we might not even really know exactly what the cost estimate will be, but I think in 2024, a part of the board's plan will be figuring out exactly where we're going to go with what Christopher has done and sort of seeing then, and that will probably also help give some clarity as to what maybe a multi-year capital plan for hardware and whatnot and investment in that sort of stuff will entail moving forward. So we're not going to really I don't think, even though the board is working very efficiently, we'll have that by the end of this budget year. So there might be a few gaps in that, but we will be coming up with a plan and probably reporting back to council with whatever that plan looks like after having met with staff and Christopher and working on a plan. So just thought I'd fill that in. Councilor Byrne, you had a question?
Through the chair, I'm curious, do you see the same upticks between both branches, downtown Millbrook and the Bruce Johnson? And I was also a little curious how you compare with the Peterborough Library. Have you touched base at all there to see if there's the same kind of general interest and uptick in participations in libraries across the greater county?
Through you. To start with your second question, no, I didn't contact the Peterborough Library to see, or with the other libraries in the county. The way I normally look at the information is I go onto the government's website and look at the statistics provided by each library through their annual survey, which is always a year behind. It's 2022 numbers are out right now, but the governing bodies that we have, the Federation of Ontario Public Library and the Ontario Library Service, all show that libraries across Ontario are gaining in use, especially as the economy starts to go down. People start to think, well, do I really have to buy that book, or can I go and borrow it from my library? The first part of your question, I have to admit, I didn't look at the numbers to compare in terms of the circulation from the two libraries. When it comes to the e-resources, they don't split out. They are just the Cavan Monaghan libraries. Bruce Johnston branch is holding its own in terms of physical circulation. I can pull up and show you numbers later. We actually have almost larger numbers of participation at our Bruce Johnston branch in terms of people coming in. One of our most successful programs is Tuesday mornings. We have between 15 and 24 people with special needs coming into the Bruce Johnston branch for an adult story time. It is amazing. It is busy. The parking lot is full because they have to come with multiple vehicles to bring that many people. It's a coordination between the library and Christian Horizons. And we have actually just launched this program at the Centennial Place, having a special needs story time on Wednesday mornings.
Thanks, Carla. That's great. Other questions, members of council? Councilor Nacho.
Thank you through you, Chair. Not as much a question, just as a comment. First, thank you for your presentation. Just some feedback through the communities of just a ton of really positive support about the library. Your presence in the community, seeing you, as Ryan said, at the other events and stuff, and just hearing from the family members. So just get a lot of strong, positive feedback from people coming in and just telling me about, the great job you guys are doing, and commendment on the new board. You guys are really, seems like you're going in a really positive direction, and I like your branding color.
Excellent. Other questions? Just one. So Carl, I'm just going to sort of summarize and allude to a couple different things just for budget purposes. So mentioned, so with the DCs, we're still having those conversations, so we might, depending on what we can find, a methodology or approach or a justification, I think is what the DC terminology, that might have an impact or a potential reduction. And if we can get more monies from DC for circulation materials, then obviously that would have a reduction in that ask. That's part one. Deputy Mayor Huntley mentioned about the rollover. One of the suggestions is I wanted to maybe raise to you to consider at the board meeting with regard and at future board meetings for the budget. The Early On Center has put forward a significant amount of capital towards the shade structure that's being constructed. And if we have that opportunity, you've put the placeholder budget in now, but if there is unspent potential monies that we aren't able to execute fully this year, one suggestion I might have rather than rolling them is to roll them over, but roll them over towards potential reductions in that shade structure. Because and that way you can sustain your ask for 7,000 next year rather than disrupting it. I know you've talked at the board level about potentially spending some of it, but there'll probably be some left over. And for us as a council, any sort of contributions toward that shade structure being, a critical asset to the library that's been identified as something the library needs. If there is money sitting there that we don't need next year for some of the capital asks, to roll it over towards that structure might be a worthwhile thing and will help with reduce the capital investment of, I think it's 20, I think Early On is contributing about maybe $8,500 towards it. And so there's still about a $20,000 plus capital request in addition to that. So it's unfortunate we didn't identify it earlier on, but it's coming now is the good news if it gets approved. So if there's money left over from this year, maybe we should direct it to that, just a thought. And we might know that in January at the next budget meeting. So if you can bring that up and we might know some more and we can figure out how to move the shelves around and get that structure built next year. Make sense? Any other questions, members of council? If not, we'll look for a motion to receive the presentation from the public libraries in Carla. Moved by Deputy Mayor Huntley, seconded by Councillor Natchop. All in favor? That is approved. Thanks very much, Carla. We'll see you next Tuesday or the Tuesday after. Oh, okay, very good. I meant about the board. Sorry. My confusion. I'll take the heat for that one. Very good. So now, having done that, we'll move on to the reports. Unfortunately, Ms. Pope has a personal matter and is not able to be here today, which means, unfortunately for you, Council, you are going to be receiving the report from myself and Ms. Hurley as we work our way through. Unfortunately, Ms. Pope has been doing the budget information, so we don't have her computer and a lot of the background information access, but she will be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in January, and we'll do the best with various department heads and members of staff here to augment the questions as we go. So I'm going to start doing the overview presentation. We actually don't have the deck from Kimberly either, but we're going to work through the report and go it that way. And so we have all the information before you. So bear with us, and I hope the sound of my voice doesn't irritate you too much. So the first draft that we're before us today is the first draft of the public presentation to provide the 2024 operating and capital budgets for review, discussion, and education purposes. The first draft, like I said, is without any further reductions would require a tax levy increase of 7.9% of the municipal tax rate. And that's to cover the capital operating budgets as they are currently formed. So management and senior staff and myself have composed the budget committee, and we've met to get the budget from the initial 14% to down to the 7.9% that we're presenting the council's consideration today. At this current year, one of the important metrics that we use for the budget consideration is a 1% increase to the municipal residential tax rate results in an additional $111,500 for the municipality to cover expenses. So that's an important number when we're making considerations with regards to capital projects and anything that's funded through the levy moving forward. As you can see on the page above us here, the tax rate increase now is stated at 7.9%. And this is what would be required in the budget cuts to reach a 3%, a 5%, or a 7% reduction. So to go from 7.9 down to a 3% reduction, we would require further cuts of 547. So year-to-date actuals that are provided mostly pertaining to the operating, but it could also have implications on the capital. All of the components in the granular details that we get in our package are only to the end of October 2023. So if you see big variances between the two for the budget and the actuals this year, it's because there's still 2 months or 3 months worth of bills that need to be reflected in those numbers. The other thing with regards to the next part of the presentation, the tax levy comparison, if you look below, those are the previous year histories that we have of the last 4 years, this being the 5th, you'll notice that the increase in CVA year over year is 1.2%. So what that reflects is that with without increasing the levy whatsoever, there's an additional 1.2% of levied monies from growth. So new taxpayers coming online, which results in, I believe it's $136,000, the equivalence of that. So as we move forward, an estimated, as we said, a 1% municipal tax levy increase equals a property tax increase of roughly $7.26 per every $100,000 of your CVA that MPAC has assessed. And that's where we're standing now. We used the current value assessment median of 400,000 because it's a rounded up, but that was the approximate median CVA throughout the entire township in 2016, the last time the MPAC values were phased in. MPAC has not changed or updated their entire inventory of homes this year again, so we're maintaining that 2016 rate that's already been alluded to. And as you can see, the 1.2% of new development, that's where the $136,675 comes in. Moving on through that, we have another graphic that sort of demonstrates where we're at with the phase-ins. So the phase-ins that were planned for 2016 have all ended as of 2024. So there's a lot of conversation now at the province and within municipalities about the imbalance that not updating the CVA values has on taxation. Because, without reflecting the current CVA, you're having a disproportionate cost or levy impact on houses that have a newer CVA that's reflecting more of a recent market value. And those previously assessed homes have not had an excess phase-in component since the 2016 evaluation. So that's where we're at. So that's the high level summary. And I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Hurley with regards to going through the operating portion of the presentation. Ms. Hurley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start with going through the operating budget. As I go through there, I'll just read everything, and then please know that we have all staff here to answer any questions with regards to each of their departments. And I hope that you ask the questions so that we can try to provide you as much information as possible throughout this budget process. So talking about operating at this time, the operating budget presented contains a consolidated department net increase of 6.5%, which includes the increased pressures on expenditures, maintaining efficiencies, improving online access, delivery of service set by council, policy, bylaw, and provincial legislation requirements. If we get through the budget portion identifies each of the departments, as I mentioned before. We break it down to the 2023 final budget, 2024 proposed budget, which is what we're here today. It is the first draft of two more budgets that will be coming, one in January and one in February. The variances are identified as below. So the consolidated department net changes are 6.5, as I mentioned. When we go into consolidated other services and levy changes, we're at 3.4. That includes council, library, Ganaraska, agencies such as conservation authorities, committees of council, and the police contract that we have with the city of Peterborough. So the total department levy proposed increase, as well as the service levy, brings us to 5.8%. Water and wastewater is set by our bylaw, of course, and it's at 4.2%. The Canadian Union Public Employees, as you know, we have Public Works and Parks as part of the collective agreements, is showing a 5.25% wage increase over the 3-year term of that contract. The Consumer Price Index, as mentioned, rose 4%. Therefore, that is what we're looking for as well moving forward. The Construction Price Index rose at 6.6%. On November 20th, 2023, Council received the annual user fee and bylaw report, and therefore that was also adopted to ensure the municipal revenue and services reduce the impact of cost of service to the municipal property tax rate. Departmental summary. The summary of changes identified in 2024 draft operating proposed are 2024 source deduction, for benefits, and that's OMERS, EI, etc. We got an 8% increase on corporate insurance and allocations based on preliminary estimates at this time. As our mayor and chair has alluded to, we were estimating at this time in the budget. This is an estimated budget. These will change as we get closer to the end of the year. 4% CPI wage index 3% increase to hydro, gas and fuel, 2% increase to landline, phone and services. VoIP is the service that we have with Nexicom, just in case anyone wants to know that. 2% increase is the intern allocation, and debentures and estimates include 3 capital projects, which is, and you're very familiar with, which is the Parks and Public Works, Millbrook Depot, Cavan Public Works Center, and the fire station with the ambulance bay. Actually, bays, 2 bays. So getting into the departments, again, I can read them all or we can stop. I think it's better if we stop, if the chair allows, within each of the departments, so that if you have any questions, then we can answer those at that time. So planning and economic development has an increase of 2.3%, which equates to 14,665, which is the preliminary attributed to the following: economic development events and advertising, contracted professional services to assist during the transition of hire of the planner. Again, I'd like to stop if I may, and then ask questions. And as I mentioned, staff is here to answer the questions.
Council Byrne?
Through the chair, so those contractors, professional services, they are going to be for the economic development side or for the planning side? And would the events plan not generate some income, revenue, whatever, not as to cover the cost, but to offset some of the costs?
So with regards to the intention for the contracted services is the exclusive cost of that is to cover the interim cost that we're incurring while we don't have the planner, where we're trying to replace the existing deficit in the board. With regards to the events, the revenue, any revenues generated through events usually is a fraction of what the costs are up front, and we need to pay the bills up front. So we need to budget for the entirety amount. We can't budget, as we do with all of these things, and we'll allude to some of them also in the capital. When we believe that there are grants or other sources of funding, we still have to levy the entirety of the amount, because we can't hope and wish with any surety that the funding, other sources of funding will be received. So we have to fund these certain events or other components of the capital budget as though there's no revenue associated with it. And then that portion, if there is, usually gets folded back into the reserves for the various departments like economic development. Is that it? But I can pass it to John. Did I miss anything? Mr. Connolly?
Through you, Chair, to Councilor Burns, just one clarification that with respect to the wording here, I think was taken from a different part. The contract of professional services, we actually hired a planner, a great addition to the team, Matthew Wilkinson. He's now 3+ months. So the additional cost, which is part of the 14,665, is part of the attributed cost to a new planner, cell phone, administration costs, things like that. And then any other increases part of the economic development events, as the mayor had pointed out.
Ms. Hurley and then Councillor Natchop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify as well, the economic development event increase this year is due to the fact that we also have estimated to, we budgeted to have the harvest table dinner. So that is actually an increase over and above last year, because we didn't have that event scheduled last year, but we did move it forward for this year in 2024.
And in the previous iteration of that event, that was a big success and a part of the fundraising effort for the new community center. There was donors and sponsors for that event as well, not to cover the entirety of the cost. But again, that's one of those portions we expected. There'll probably be sponsorship opportunities that businesses might want to take up, and that will reduce those costs, but we still have to budget as though we're fully funding the entirety of the event. Councillor Natchop.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, just a question about the landline phones. So is the 2% increase due to what you anticipate as increased usage, or is this a predetermined agreement with Nexicom that you have a yearly 2% increase to costs?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Natchop, I am not aware of the agreement, so I would assume it's just what we've been billed from last year. We don't have an actual agreement, but we just bill what our percentage cost might be. So it's estimated at this time. Hopefully by the end of the year, we'll be able to have to confirm cost of what that rate would be. It's a usage then.
Other questions? If not, we can go on to the building department. Sterling.
Thank you. The building department is funded through the building permit revenues and therefore does not affect the municipal tax rate. The building department has an increase at 19.3%. However, that equates to $78,890, which is primarily attributed to the additional building inspector for a full year and the contract for a partial for 2023, which is what the increase is for the building and the building department, excuse me. And Kyle is here if you have any questions.
Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, to Kyle. With kind of the slowdown in builds and things like that, you're showing a pretty hefty increase of almost 20%. Like, are you taking into account kind of that ebb and flow of your industry with that 20%? Because I don't know, like, it seems like I assume you must have some sort of reserve or something. If the work doesn't show up, how do you handle that? Or are you then stuck with an employee, even though the bottom's fallen out of the market?
Through your chair to Councillor Huntley, great question. That's what every year it's tricky to shoot, especially lately, what the market's going to be. We do have to prepare for worst case. Our numbers there aren't too high considering that we're also taking over the septic program. So that will bring it up. That's going to be there regardless. So some of the proposed subdivisions we have are still on conventional septic. So those will have septic permits as well. Taking into account all the development around us and the potential there, I don't think we're shooting too high. It could be well over that. Back when Tower Hill South was going full steam, our permit fee numbers we were bringing in were in the range of 350,000. So it was more than what we're proposing for this year. So we tried to keep it tight. We could have proposed more to make it the percentage look better, but knowing that the market is in flux, we tried to keep it down to give a realistic number. We do have a decent reserve for those low years if it takes a while for all these developments to go ahead. But given the number we have on the go and potential industrial on Sire Line, Cham Cham's always going, there's quite a lot that could take off, and there's potential for that number to almost be double. But yeah, it could be less than that as well. It's very tricky to troubleshoot that. Also, an additional comment just to make is we're always looking at what the split is between bylaw and building as well. And that's always tricky because we base it on the previous year. So it's depending what enforcement files we're doing, if they're building related or bylaw related. The bulk of this year has been building related. So we actually reduced our percentage of bylaw, and you'll see that also with the percent decrease on the bylaw side.
Thank you. Other questions? Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair, I noticed later on in the report, it seems to me that maybe there's another pickup, a Ford pickup or something bought for the purpose of the new hire, because some of the numbers show zeros. So I'm guessing that's what it is. And to Mr. Huntley's comment about the ebbs and flows, is this going to help us catch up with the backlog of bylaw things that you have been dealing with over the past year?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Byrne, good question. What we're proposing there is actually to take back over our Ford Ranger that the building permit purchased in 2011. So if Public Works Department goes ahead with a new truck, we're just taking back that our old Ranger to try to save some money on capital there. So we actually took 40,000 of the capital because it's still in decent running shape, in my opinion. And it's a nice small truck. It's all we need on the building side. We don't need to carry too much. So that will hopefully still work. So we budgeted a bit more in the operating side for just a bit of maintenance on that vehicle. The second part, the enforcement files, yes, the additional inspector, the intent for that was because I am doing so much enforcement, probably 90% of my job right now is orders and legal cases and stuff. Unfortunately, that is giving me more capacity to deal with those files and get them more under control. And the more we do on the enforcement files, the less you get moving forward. So yeah, that definitely has helped, and that is the potential there.
follow up on that, Mr. Phillips, in regards to, I mean, we're well aware, especially at the county with the POA revenue about the backlog within the court proceedings. Is that a factor with some of the backlog with regards to the bylaw processing or finalizing some of those enforcement issues? And can you estimate about, a percentage or any sort of number that you might have as to how many of those sort of lingering issues are probably held up due to that, the delay from COVID with regards to the processing of those offenses by the court?
Yeah, to you, Chair. It's a bit tricky. So there has been some backlog. The courts are getting better. It was backed up for getting close to 2 years at some points, but we are getting quicker court dates now. So files are moving ahead. Our backlog has definitely been cleaned up. It's always a question of what court procedure you go through. Provincial court, you get fines, but that's a lot of staff time. We have to serve our own summons to court. We have to go in, get our summons signed by the JP. When you go out and try to serve a summons and the person's not there, you can be driving to another township and they're not there. It takes a lot more staff time, and you're at the whim of what the court decides for a fine. So their potential is strictly fine only. You could go through 20 hours of work to get a $500 fine. So that's not great, but in some cases you have to do that to get action. In other cases, if it's a more complicated file, a bigger file, we try to go to Superior Court as much as we can to get a bigger hammer for like demolition of buildings and that type of thing. So definitely the court times have been getting better. We're only looking at within the year at this point.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Councillor Nacho.
Thank you, through you, Chair. For Mr. Phillips, I know that you earlier last year or earlier this year, you had partnered with, I think it was City of Kawartha Lakes, to kind of do like a work share program for inspections. Can you just speak to how that's gone? Is that alleviated work for you? Is it added more work for you? How's that whole new program been working?
Through you, Chair, Councillor Natchoff. Oddly enough, we entered into that just for backup, in case either of us got really busy. Really, we did it at that time to help City of Kawartha Lakes because they were in a bad situation. They haven't utilized us to date because they ended up getting a few hires, and so I think their numbers were getting better. It still is there just in case we need somebody, and not knowing where they had an in-house septic program. Not knowing where we were going with the septic side, we thought that was also a good potential for us to be able to utilize them if we needed for that. We haven't used them and they still haven't used us. So currently talking with their CBO about what we're going to do moving forward if it's still needed.
Thank you for that. Other questions? If not, I believe we've kind of gotten into the bylaw component, but you can blaze over it if you like, Ms. Hurley.
I don't think so. I think you guys did a great job. Next is protected services, which is the fire department. It's at a 1.3%, which equates to 13,658, which is attributed to the following: paging system contract changes and offsetting reserve funds to a partial year of the implementation, and fire dispatch services agreement renews based on increasing the household. And again, the fire chief is here to speak to those two items.
Would you like the chief to speak to those items now, or would you like to go to questions? Okay, we'll go to questions. Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair, I'm curious about this reallocation of volunteer firefighter hours and suppression and training, what that actually impacts on things. But the other question I would have, the paging services, that's a yearly contract, I'm guessing, but the uptick for the dispatch services, could you tell us roughly what the numbers have changed in number of households from prior year?
Through the mayor to Councillor Burns, I'm going to start with the first question, reallocation of volunteer firefighter work hours. It's a budgeting process, and it was at my request so that we could manage the hours that our volunteers are working and sort of the different projects that that those hours are attributed to better manage them. So we've just taken it out of, for instance, training hours and put it into a program in the operating budget that you can now see what those hours are for. So while the increase looks very high in this new system Diamond, I believe it's called, it's just a reallocation so that I can better manage those hours. And what that stemmed from was council was very supportive in implementing a auxiliary division. And the fear was that there would be increased work hours, which that's not the case. It's more of just attributing those hours. That there's no more additional work. It's just so that I can manage those hours and ensure that we don't have additional staff doing the same job that we were doing before. Does that answer your question on that point? And then the second question was in regards to the paging service. And our paging current company has been a long-standing partner with us. However, the owner is looking to retire. Paging is becoming an antiquated service. However, for summonsing volunteer firefighters to emergency scenes, it's still our best option. We do utilize an app that runs on cell phones. But as we know, cell phones, especially in different areas of this particular township, there's little to no service. So we're not assuring that they're being summoned to the emergency. So this changes to the paging contract is going to be a joint initiative with the other 8 municipalities within Peterborough County. There will be a report coming forward to council because it will be entering into a contract with the new service provider. We're still just working out those details. And like I said, there will be a report brought forward to council outlining what that contract is. It's important to note that there's some funds being utilized out of reserves that we've been putting away for a number of years in our communication divisions to sort of offset this cost. And we've estimated in the budget for a partial year, not the full year, because there will be time in the year before the report gets to council.
Thanks, Chief. Other questions for the chief? Okay, there you go. Thank you, Ms. Hurley. If you want to continue on to our favorite subject, public work.
I was going to say that. I know. Public Works Department has a consolidated increase at 7.1%, which equates to 158,696, which is primarily attributed to the following: the expansion of the public works staff from 8 routes to 9, associated costs with that, an increased cost of material, which is cold mix gravel and calcium chloride. And that's based on a review of how much we spent in 2023, what those items are under operating, and our proposed increase for 2024.
Questions with regard to Public Works Department for the operational increase? Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, though the overall increase is only 7%, I didn't notice, Mr. Hancock, but there's a fairly significant increase in the wages area. Are we expecting to bring on more staff? Works? Is that kind of what's going on this year? Thank you.
Through Mr. Mayor, to the deputy mayor, actually, we included in the salary for 2023 only part of a full-time employee. So this year in 2024, we provided for the annual. That's the 9th operator as referred to, and that was primarily brought on to offset the workload of Tower Hill subdivision. So it is a full annual amount. There is really no additional costs that are looked at, just the 9 employees. We have transfer station and of course crossing guard. We also have added the salary in for the crossing guard at Sherbrooke, because that will come on in January. That's really your 2 increases.
Councillor Nacho.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Just a follow-up question then. Do we have a date? I know we were discussing in the previous budget, just because I've had a couple of constituents ask when we're expecting to take over clearing for Tower Hill.
You, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Natchoff, we have actually taken over it now. We are doing it now. I think we're noticing we're going to do some warning tags in the subdivision because we are having cars parked and some across sidewalks, but the maintenance of sidewalks and roads is with us now.
Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair, this extra load created by Tower Hill South, I can't see that it would be the same volume of work that the other routes would have maintained over the last decades or so. Does that supplement somewhere else, or how's that actually relate to the number of houses being serviced by this 9th route compared to some of the other routes, or what's your plan there?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councilor Burns, we generally rebalance our routes depending on where the workload is. We've found some routes a little longer. Certainly Tower Hill is, it's a fairly tight route, and we're doing both roads and sidewalks, so it's double the manpower. But we do notice that when we have longer routes, we'll shift the staff to the longer route to help out. And that tends to be some of the north routes that we have. And if it's taking more than 5 hours to do the route, we'll try and supplement them by sending somebody out. We also have a 3/4 truck that we use for plowing. We do the municipal lots, we do the transfer station, and we're taking over, of course, our water, wastewater. We're doing those parking areas in those facilities. And we do the fire hall. So we do most of the municipal with our operations, including this community center. So that's kind of a description, but we do rebalance as we go forward, trying to make sure we have equal time in equal areas.
Thank you for that, Wayne. Other questions? If not, we can move on to Parks and Facilities.
Thank you. The Parks and Facilities Department has an increase at 3.1%, which equates to $36,547. The increase is estimated with regards to the rental and concession. I think we received a lot more in revenues, given the fact that COVID is hopefully no longer with us, and therefore we're in our full operations, which we're very excited to see. Increasing staffing hours, obviously with the new programs and the rentals, increased 10,000 contracted services for regulatory replacement of refrigeration pressures and relief valve, and increase in gas and utility services.
Thank you, Ms. Hurley. Questions, members of council, with regards to Parks and Facilities operations? Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair, so this contracted services for the regulatory 5 years, that's going to happen every 5 years moving forward, I'm assuming?
Through you, Mayor, to Councilor Byrne, yes, it is a 5-year regulation to switch out the pressure relief valves.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Other questions, members of council? Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, and to Mr. Allison, looking at the expenses at the Bruce Johnson, like, I noticed the hydro and the gas seem to jump considerably. Is there something going on there that's causing them to kind of leap up so high? Like, I know obviously things are getting more expensive, but this is fairly significant jump.
Early.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, when there are questions related to the operations, would you like us to move to the operations section of the document? If so, we can certainly do that.
I think it would be helpful if that's not amenable. Deputy Mayor Huntley, do you have the page or the page within the operating line? 4 of 11 in the operations report for Parks and Facilities? Hope that's all. Okay. I believe Mr. Allison wants to speak to it anyways. Yeah. That's all.
Through you, Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Huntley, the hydro, the gas, all that, finance. looks at all the bills up to this point. And then they come up with an average for the increase for the months that we're missing here. As for any issues out there, I'm not aware of any issues or whether Carla has any issues with any hydro out there, lights being on or anything like that. I have no recollection of what would put the hydro up.
Yeah, I'm sure Ms. Pope could provide clarity on that as well, but it was, before I go to, and Councillor Bernard, was there a follow-up question to that, Deputy Mayor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, then I'm guessing it's more of a allocation than it is the actuals. So I guess when Ms. Pope gets a chance, we'll rather see kind of more the actuals than just kind of an allocation put in there, if you don't mind.
Ms. Hurley?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. It's a good point, and I'm glad you highlighted it because it's a balancing kind of until we get to the end of the year. So we do take a look at these spikes and see whether or not it has been allocated correctly. It does seem a little bit high. It looks like a bit of a spike. So we would certainly take a look at that before we go to our second phase of the budget and see where that is. But it's something, thank you for pointing it out, but we will definitely take a look at that.
Councillor Byrne?
Through the chair, on that note, can we take a serious look at the lighting for the new center? I often see the glow from the old bypass coming out of Peterborough. And I hear it from a lot of residents that we're fairly well lit through the entire evening. I just wonder if that could be looked at.
Is there I think the lighting is on until midnight, because that's usually when the staff have finished cleaning after the final booking. Are you talking about later than that, Councillor Byrne, or I just wanted to be clarified just for Chris?
I would just like to have a review of things. So if it needs to be on, that's one thing, but I have no idea what's going on inside the building, and neither do the residents of the community, but they see the glow. There's so much lighting from that facility through most of the evening that it makes people wonder.
Yeah, well, Chris, do you want to speak to the booking schedule maybe, and then we can allude to that and also the efficiencies of the new community center as well?
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Byrne. Currently our bookings, we run Monday to Friday. We're usually 4 or 5 p.m. right till 11 o'clock at night. Staff is in the building till midnight, cleaning the building. So the lights are on until midnight. Parking lot lights are on till midnight as well. We are having an issue right now. We're replacing a sensor over there, so they're not shutting off. The sensor's not working. The electrician was in yesterday. So whether it was over the last week, that's our issue right now. But come midnight, all the lights, they shut off. They're all on timer system. Midnight, they shut off. They come on 6 in the morning. Weekends, we're running 6 in the morning till 11 o'clock at night. Staff is there till midnight cleaning.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Other questions with regards to parking facilities? If not, Ms. Hurley, would you like to talk about your office?
Thank you. Office of the CAO has an increase of 7.8%, which equates to 19,708, which is attributed to human resources.
Questions? Seeing none, you can continue. Sorry.
The Office of the Clerk has an increase of 12%, which equates to 32,324, which is primary, an increase of 6K for the FOI and records retention training for all staff. That is new for this year. Additional 15K towards the Northumberland Humane Society fees. And finally, the continuation of records retention contract with a rollover available to offset the cost for 2024.
Thank you for that, Ms. Hurley. Ms. Page, can you maybe provide some clarity with regards to the 15K Northumberland Humane Society? If I'm not understanding it correctly, I think that's an upset limit, but if that's just the renewal or for that service provision, if you can just clarify that.
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor, through you to yourself and the rest of council. In 2021, Cavan Monaghan Council and staff received a request from the Peterborough Humane Society to ask for $50,000 to be allocated in our 2022 proposed budget to build their new facility. The council of the day chose not to go forward with that due to COVID and the increase in the demands and how tight that year was. So we received a follow-up letter from the Peterborough Humane Society terminating our agreement. So as it stands now, we have not had an agreement in place since 2022 for any pound services. So we have been able to manage. However, this year we had 6 dogs that we had in one day, and we were trying to find their homes, which we were able to do by the end of the 24 hours. But having said that, as we move forward, we don't have a service or anywhere to take these dogs if we have them. And part of the service that has been in place with Cabin Monaghan is animal control for dog controls. And with that, there isn't a renewal, if you will, Mr. Mayor. This would be a new agreement. I would say replacing the agreement that we had in place with the Peterborough Humane Society. So the ask is for $15,000 to enter into this agreement. They would provide the pound service. So that's if we have a dog that Deb can't find its home to. And it's a 5-year agreement is what they're proposing. Does that answer the question, Mr. Mayor?
Just one point of clarity. So with regards to the 15,000, is that an annual cost for each year of the 5 years, or is that an upset limit for the amount of cost that can be incurred by the township?
That's $15,000 per year with a 4% increase every year for the 5 years.
Thank you for that. Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair, for my ignorance, because I wasn't around back then listening to this stuff. The agreement we had with Peterborough back in the day, was it this costly? And we got by without it since 2022 is what I'm saying or hearing. We had that one uptick of 6 dogs in a short period of time. This seems like a lot of money on the off chance that we see dogs or whatever animal that's going to be protected under this. And it just seems like a lot of money for the possibility of when we've been getting by for several years without. And I have no idea what agreement you had with the Peterborough Humane Society prior to.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Byrne, the agreement in place with Peterborough Humane Society did not have a flat rate. It was as we had the service, this was the first time that they asked for us to pay any kind of substantial fee, was that $50,000 request. This is the first proposal that we've received is from Peterborough Humane or from the Northumberland Humane Society, and Asphodel Norwood also has secured this. So I think $15,000 is a reasonable ask. They take the dog in. If there's anything wrong with the dog, they'll take care of the dog. They help relocate the dog. They try to find the owner for the dog. And I think that's probably.
Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair, the mayor mentioned it. So it's not per use at all. It's just a flat rate. And they're expecting a 4% increase every year automatically.
That's correct.
Councillor Natcha? That's it. Councillor Spence. Okay, great. Other questions? If not, we can move on to the finance department and try to stick handle through this one.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the Finance Department and Information Technology has a 10.8% increase, which equates $33,314. The increased cost of software and licensing and support with a minimum of IT reserves, the reallocation of wage and benefits for the finance customer service rep, reduction and availability of the grant utilization to offset the asset management, and the implementation of the virtual city hall, which is the VCH, has the final phase of the financial software, which we've mentioned before, which is a part of the Diamond integration and migration process.
Questions, members of council with regards to this? Again, Kimberly can probably provide more clarity on a lot of these projects when she's back for the second presentation, but we can try. Councillor Byrne.
So this Diamond tech thing, yes, is it something that's going to be completed, or is it an ongoing thing that's going to be a continual revision and more expense on a yearly basis?
So the licensing component is always an ongoing cost, and it's kind of like a renewal for the license to utilize the process. With regards to probably not in the operation line, we're still working through the capital installation of the full program and the full conversion. That's not quite fully done yet. This is the first year's budget that's being able to be presented by it. But if my understanding is correct, we're not fully implemented until the end of this year, if I'm not mistaken, from all departments, correct? Does that answer the question, Councilor? Okay. Other questions? If not, we can head to the next.
Council budget has a decrease of 7.1%, which is 16,390, which is primarily attributed to the reduction and establishment of the council remuneration, 30 between one council remuneration bylaw number 2023, 30 between the year of one exception and attendance to 4 conferences. And that's when the reduction for this year is based on the first year of council. We always allow for you to attend all of the conferences that are potentially available for you when you first get elected. And then therefore, after that, then we go down to 2. So that is what the reduction is.
Questions? Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, and I don't see it happening, but if I saw some value in these, I could attend out of my own pocket and that wouldn't be a problem.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. No, that's entirely up to you. Yes, of course.
Other questions? If not, we can move on to Conservation Authority.
Conservation Authority's budget is consolidated increase of 3.9%, which is $4,420 of the levy. Committees of council budget has increased of 0.7, which is 100 from original 3, quite minor. Which includes Millbrook Valley Trail Committee adjustment and our Mr. Hack. However, 2 new committees, Sustainability Advisory Committee, which we refer to as SAC, and the Accessibility Advisory Committee have been added in the 2023 with the additional requests and result consolidation increase of $243.8%, which is $35,100, including the data analysis, which is also being proposed as under the SAC committee.
Questions, members of council? Councilor Natchoff, is that a question? Sorry.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So from what Deputy Mayor Huntley had said, he's already a member of SAC. Do we have an anticipated start date for when the accessibility committee? Just I've had a few interested people in the community, so I think you shouldn't have any problem filling this committee, hopefully.
Through Mr. Chairman, I could respond to that, but however, I'll let Ms. Page respond to that because she's dealing with that as we speak, actually.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Natchoff. Actually, it is the opposite. We are struggling with trying to fill this committee, and I'm going to be bringing a report forward on the 18th saying that. So if there are people that you know of, please tell them to submit their application. We're accepting them as soon as we can. The legislation does say that we have to have an accessibility advisory committee in place. We're over 10,000 people. We have sought legal to find out what the next step is. We are struggling with many of our committees, advisory committees, and trying to meet that complement. So please, if you know anybody in the community, the requirement is we do need 50% of that membership to have a disability, and that's where we're struggling. So please, if you have anybody, have them submit their application as soon as possible.
Just a quick follow-up. What's the minimum number of people you require on this committee then?
5 is the total, 3. Yeah.
Other questions, Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, we had some discussion with this the other day, and I was curious why this accessibility thing would be an ongoing event, being that at some point in 2025, everything is supposed to be accessible province-wide under guidelines, and anything other than that, I would have thought would be dealt with by buildings and bylaws under the building code. So I'm looking at this. Why does it need to go forward? Like, I don't have a problem with it coming into play and setting some guidelines. I'm just having trouble thinking why it needs to go on.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Byrne. As you'll recall in the report that we brought forward, it's a legislative requirement. Once you exceed 10,000 people in your municipality, you have to create an accessibility advisory committee. This committee provides recommendations or suggestions to council on site plans, buildings, new developments, things like that, within the regulations that are allowed, such as curb cuts, parking spots, and items like that. I don't believe, to be completely truthful, there will be a large ask. The ask of the $35,000 is from the Sustainability Advisory Committee. There is no ask from the Accessibility Advisory Committee at this point for any funding.
The joys of legislative requirements. Okay, other questions with regards to committees of council? Not, back to you, Ms. Hurley.
Next is the Millbrook Business Improvement Area, the BIA. The board has submitted a proposed increase of a BIA levy at 12%, which is 1.681.90. The special BIA budget meeting was held on November 9th, 2023, live stream to discuss the proposed budget from the BIA. The BIA board will present their discussed proposed budget of a 12% increase at the upcoming annual general meeting.
Questions, members of council, Councilor Naji.
Through you, Chair, just so we're clear for the other board members, this levy would be levied against the building owners and not directly against the taxpayers, correct?
Through you, that is correct. It is a levy for the businesses. It's not a general levy. It is a very special levy that's identified not only in the BIA Act, but it's also identified under the Municipal Act. Yep.
Other questions? Not, lease and contracted service.
Police and contracted service budgeted. As you know, we have an agreement with the police, City of Peterborough Police. The agreement identifies a 2.1%.
And with regards to that we are in year 2 of the 3 or 4 year agreement? Is it 3 years? 5, right? Correct. Okay, very good. 5-year contract, correct. Questions? Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair, and this will probably come up later in some of the other paperwork, but this agreement we have, I thought back in the day it was kind of a flat rate, but it looks like we're paying for their insurance. It looks like we're paying for some of their contact information when they're trying to get it communication wise. And I just wondered what that actual agreement that we're paying that large sum of money actually looks after and what other stuff get added onto it later on.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have the agreement in front of me right now, but it is a public document and I can certainly sit with you and go through that agreement and identify those items that you, or at least explain those items that you are asking for. But I did not have the agreement for today's discussion.
Councilor Nash.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, just a comment, not as much a question. As a business owner, I just wanted to make council aware. I was really impressed with the fact that the new police chief came and introduced himself to all of the businesses when he came on this year. And that the police, the officers themselves, I just see a little bit more of a presence. Not that it's necessary, like we don't have, rampant crime in downtown Millbrook at all, but just a better kind of communication and connection with the business owners in the community. And I just kind of wanted to relate that from someone as a kind of vested interest. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can make sure I pass that on at the next police board meeting as well. And we did actually, I should have mentioned this at the previous council meeting, but we did have a strategic plan meeting with a public meeting with regards to the police board. And the chief and I are going to have a few conversations stemming from the discussion about some opportunities to enhance the profile of the policing in the township and as well. So it was a really good discussion and I was glad I attended so we can have more of that local lens. As you can imagine, there's some subject matter that's very much dominating the police focus and the nature of that, but it was good to be there to talk about more of the rural components for the contracted services as well as my colleague from Selwyn who provided similar comments. So that was a very positive meeting and we look forward to further conversations with the chief. Seeing no other comments, we'll go on to the next.
Environmental tax rate is next. The 2024 environmental budget indicates an increase of 32,460 for operational costs of the municipal waste programs, which includes landfill monitoring, transfer station expenses. Public Works Report 2022-18 recommended an extend the service contract with the, and I'll just read the number, 2337700 Ontario Limited, operating with Withers Waste Management. And in 2024, the municipality will receive 35,000 revenue from the new Circular Materials Ontario, which we refer to as CMO, for the haulage and disposal services for the blue box material received at the Cavan Monaghan transfer station. That too went before you as well. This budget equals the environmental tax rate decrease of 0.25 per 100,000 of current value assessment based on the estimated impact accessible wall.
Thank you, Ms. Hurley. Questions, members of council? Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, the cost of curbside pickup has steadily gone up, and we made a couple of extensions, I believe, already with Ms. Withers as far as the service. Are we at a point where this is going to go back out to tender? I know that was a struggle before, and what to expect in the coming year.
So I'm sure Mr. Hancock can speak to that, but with regards to the tender, yeah, we have continued with the year-over-year extensions because of the outcomes of the going back to tender were exponential, I think 2 to 3 times increases of potential other service providers, whereas Withers with the extension process and availability has insulated us from that sort of drastic increase with regards to line. But Mr. Hancock, you probably have more comment.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councilor Byrne, I think there's a couple of issues at hand. One, we know the county is looking at the issue and going to report on the issue of the takeover of garbage collection. We're not sure where that's at, and we're not sure where they're going with the green bin program. We did, as we noted before, we did tender the waste collection contract. We ended up with prices that were 100 or more % above our present contract. So we were able to negotiate with Withers, and we're at 20, typically on 10, we're only over about 10% increase over last year. So they are by far the most economical. They have what's referred to as a fuel surcharge in there. If there's an up and down in the fuel price, they have the right to adjust. But generally, they have been performing much less than the tendered prices we got, and still providing a relatively good service. So we are finding the extensions, they have not come back with increases on a, it's allowed on a 3-month basis. They have not brought any forward to us. So they're carrying on. They do, and they have only once asked for an increase in fuel prices. So we find at this point in time, they are the most cost effective. And when we did tender, we only had Withers and one other company. And as I say, they were quite high, substantially high.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. Questions? Councillor Edgerton.
You, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Hancock here. I see landfill monitoring. What landfill are we still monitoring?
To Mr. Mayor, Councillor Edgerton, we did, you may remember, we did report on this matter. It was the Millbrook landfill that was out on King Street West on County Road 21 there. And that landfill, we were able to get the ministry agreed to the full closure of that. So the monitoring is now complete, and this will, as we had indicated in the report that came forward, there were some funds that will be transferred over into the general reserve. So we have completed monitoring, and this landfill is now closed and can be used for other recreational, whatever purposes.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. Other questions? Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair, to that note, I was under the impression too, we're also monitoring the end of the 7th line where it crosses Tapley, and we use it for some of our deposits. Is that the case? And at some point in the future, the transfer station, which used to be a dump, it will become a liability at some point if we ever cease to use it as a transfer station?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councilor Byrne, the Larmer pit, as you refer to it at the end of the Larmer line, it was originally a gravel pit. We had used it as a fill site, and we did through senior staff with the Ministry of Natural Resources, we were able to have the license relinquished, which means it's no longer considered a pit area, and it is licensed as a municipal fill area. So we are allowed to use it as a fill area. It had a substantial quantity that could go in it, but each year we're adding to that. So ultimately it will reach its capacity and we'll have to look elsewhere. But presently roadside ditching, some municipal projects, we ship our material to that site. That is typically under the fill regulations has to be referred to as clean native material. No hazardous waste, anything like that is allowed. On the transfer station, we are to provide an annual record on that. That's just really indicating the service. We have an ECA on that with the ministry, and they do inspections on not an annual basis, but they do inspections on our site. Ultimately, if the transfer station does ever close, and there will probably not be any change of use. I see the site, if it closes, it will just become a recreational site, just a site township owned, and we are not monitoring now, and we haven't never been required to, so we don't expect that to come forward. But right now, it's only an annual report, and they do inspect us as per our ECA and our operation there.
So in looking at a similar subject, in looking at the granular details within the environmental, so 5,000 is what we have allocated with regards to the monitoring. But because of that report coming forward and the monitoring is decommissioned, so what is the 5,000 doing if we don't? I was under the impression it was for Larmer as well. So if we're not monitoring Larmer, and we're asking for 5,000 for a dump that we've already received a license for decommissioning, I'm just not sure what the 5,000 would be utilized for. Is there still some final things that we're not aware of with regards to the closure?
I think, Mr. Mayor, the 5,000 was just ongoing. It's reporting by our consultant, how it's became on that. It's just to clean up the files on that. So it's just basically anything that carries over into 2024. Our original monitoring was closer to over 20,000. So it's been reduced, and we're just really, as they say, doing up the final paperwork on that.
Thank you. Questions? If not, we can keep rolling through. We're on water and wastewater. Ms. Hurley.
Thank you. Water and wastewater operating budget, as you know, is presented through or utilized and presented through the water and wastewater financial plan rate study for the user fee charges and bylaw 2020-66. It's important to note that the water service and the user pay is therefore not affected in the municipal tax rate. It will go by the bylaw, sir.
Ms. Hurley, questions for water, wastewater? Seeing, Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair. So when somebody asked me, is there any foreseeable chance that the water rates in Millbrook will ever normalize or possibly decrease? The hope was years ago when they sold them on this idea that more houses coming in was going to eventually make that better. But as we see the planned subdivisions going on is only going to increase the cost of wastewater in the settlement area.
Mr. Hancock, would you like to address that one?
Mr. Mayor, through you to Councilor Byrne, again, I think there's a couple of different issues that have been touched on. One, it should be clear that the growth issues are a development charge issue. So infrastructure that we're looking forward in the master servicing and whatnot is a growth item, and that will not be paid for by the users. Generally, if you increase your residential population, your commercial users, ICI as we call it, your rates will stabilize and come down. The problem with water, wastewater is the same as in most industries. The cost of contracts, the cost of materials have all doubled. And so we are probably lucky that we're limiting it to just over 4%. And it's taking into account a doubling of the pricing of materials and contract prices throughout the industry. So this is not an easy task, but overall, I think you'll find that as growth proceeds, you will have a stable price and it will normalize, as we call it, as we go forward, but that will take time.
And I think realistically, I mean, we still have capacity on the existing system. So until the system has reached capacity, what more users coming online, the infrastructure that those users are having is not affecting the usage of the levy whatsoever, or the rates perspective. It's all insulated from that. What is going to do is with that capacity, more users on the system are going to buffer future costs of enhancement and redevelopment that are not covered in development charge. So all of the investment in the infrastructure replacement in the historical village would traditionally be carried only by the previous 500 or 600 users. Whereas now, all of that work that we're doing in the replacing the 50 to 60-year-old infrastructure in the village of Millbrook is being subsidized and offset and divided by more users. So the costs of managing the existing system are being shared by a number of people, and the rates are being significantly benefited, or the longer standing users are significantly being subsidized by that cost of infrastructure being shared, because the new infrastructure isn't costing us anything. And we do have still capacity. So with regards to that component, what we're seeing now is actually, whereas I think if I recall 4 to 5 years ago, we were in the top sort of 10 to 15% of the rate comparison when we saw that graph from the consultant. What we're seeing now is that all of those municipalities across Ontario that haven't invested in significant, multi-million-dollar infrastructure like was done by the previous councils are hitting with 20 to 50 to 70% increases in their rates because they haven't made these investments. So our rates are maintaining a stability, whereas others are out of whack, crazy increases being incurred. So we are insulating. The market is now realistically catching up with us having made that investment. And we're falling further down from the 10 to 15 because of that reality. And a lot of, I know Gray Bruce was one that they were seeing a 200 to 300, I think, increase in their rates with regards to the infrastructure work that needed to be done. And hopefully we won't have that issue. Other questions with regards to the water wastewater rates? If not, we can start the conversation to capital. Would we like to take a break? It's been an hour and a half. I think we should take a 5-minute break just to reset, and we've finished the operating so we can start the fulsome conversation of capital. All right. Quick recess for 5 minutes. Thank you. All right, we'll now renew the meeting, rejoin the regular or the special budget meeting of December 7th. We are on the capital budget consideration component, and I will turn it back over to Ms. Hurley for the beginnings of that presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we are on the capital, you are correct. I think the best thing to do for everyone is if we move to the description of the capital items before we do the final costing at that point. So if we could please move, Carly, down to the capital request and the breakdown by department, please. It's much easier to follow along. If I may. Through council, there is a tab that identifies the capital with a breakdown. That's perfect. Thank you. We can sort of modify it. That's good. Thank you. Okay. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, so the capital items again we do divide it by department. And maybe what we'll do is we'll go through each of the departments. And if council has any questions, then we're here to answer any of your questions that you might have. It's just important to note, if I may just take a moment and take a look at the top line. The top line of the items, you've got your capital request items by department on the left-hand side. You've got your request of purchase. So that is actually what the total purchase is for that particular item. And if you follow along to the right, it tells you how we're going to propose how to fund that item. So basically, other reserves and funding is available. We'll certainly identify it. It's bracketed in and it's in red. Transfer from reserves. Some of these items are forecasted in our 10-year forecast. So therefore, you might see that they're not being identified as being utilized in 2024, but we certainly do our forecast and we certainly budget accordingly. So we may, put some monies away every year. So therefore, when we actually need to do the purchase, we have the funds available. So you'll see transfer to reserve, but not actually a purchase spent for 2024. Then you have your 2023 rollovers. That's a rollover from budgeted items that we had in 2023. There may be many reasons of why there's a rollover. Maybe the project's ongoing, maybe the project didn't start. Certainly staff is here to speak to those items as well. We have transfer from asset replacement, and then we have future budget for pre-approvals. As you know, there are some pre-approvals council has already made for our 2024. So those are identified within that sector. The adjusted total, the far right-hand side, is actually what you're asking for the ratepayer. So that is your tax levy increase proposed for 2024. So for first example, you take myself under Chief Administrative Officer, Corporate Strategic Plan. We've budgeted, it's a rollover, it's a rollover from 2023. The estimated cost of the project is $44,000. The rollover is basically we're pulling from other funding, which is 19, the rollover of 25,000. Therefore, there is no ask for that project in 2024. I should state that there's something new this year. We've got a purple area identified in our capital this year. It was suggested that we put a bracket and state how much money we already currently have in the budget for that item. As I mentioned, we may be putting monies away in reserves. There may be some other items. So therefore, it'll show you exactly how much money we currently have in reserves for this project. And it also, another suggestion that was made this year is a PFD, which states when that project will be purchased. So again, it's the forecasted purchase. So we've identified that. So that helps you understand where our goals are and why we continue to put monies away so that when we actually have that purchase, we actually have those funds available. And it tells you the year of that projected purchase at this time. So for finance, if I can continue through, Mr. Chairman, finance is asset management, policy reporting, Bill 6 regulation. We have asset management reserve. We might come back to that with your permission, sir. There's a lot of questions that maybe you might have regarding asset management, but we'll come back to that one. Information technology, again, that's under the finance department. So it talks about financial management software integration, talks about the hardware replacement program upgrades, talks about network server switches, modernization plan. That's a rollover. The infrastructure is also a rollover, and the IT service and modernization plan is also a rollover. As you can see, identifies what the costs are for this year, our rollovers that have been identified, and what the ask is for the levy for this year. So the ask for finance is 15,200 for the levy. Maybe, is there any questions you want me to go through sections, sir, or how would you like to do that?
I think like as we go through department by department, I think we can sort of pause just as we did for operating, and opportunity for questions. I mean, most of these, there's not a ton in IT, finance and IT with regards to capital. And again, that's Kimberly's bread and butter department. So, you know, most of those questions she could probably answer in more detail, but it does allude to the fact that we talk about we already referenced in the ongoing, operating in costs of the financial management software integration. There's also capital costs identified with finalizing that integration as well, or the ongoing work to integration, which is a 10,444 rollover plus 10,000 for this year. But we can try to answer questions with regards to IT, but Kimberly's probably the one to provide more detailed answers on that. I can't. Depending on the question. Any questions? If not, we'll keep going on to planning, building, and ECDEV. Okay, Ms. Hurley.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to council. So planning, building, and ECDEV, we have Baxter Creek floodplain, SPA, special policy area, employment lands, marketing materials, a rollover, downtown mural, it's rollover. 2019, 2022, 22 CIP incentive, rollover. 2023 CIP incentive, again, rollover. We've got a transfer to reserve for the official plan and potentially a ZBA, I guess, is they've sort of combined the two. We already have funds identified within that, which are highlighted in the purple. We have a Bell restoration project that was a recommendation coming forward through your Mr. Hack committee. We also have another new project, which is called the Porch Light Project. Again, from Mr. Hack is a recommendation to go forward for council for consideration for those two new projects.
Thank you. So any questions with regards to the budget composition for that? I know we're going to, Councillor Edgerton has some comments with regards to the two for the Mr. Hack committee that he represents, but if there's other questions, we can deal with those first. Deputy Mayor Huntley, was there a question? And then Councillor Byrne?
Through you, Chair, with regard to the CIP rollovers, I get the 2019 to 2022 is waiting for those projects to complete because they've already been awarded. The 2023, I believe we just approved a piece of that one, function of that one. So this is the remainder rolling over. Okay, that's fine. But where's the 2024?
We're just not, oh, Mr. Connolly.
Through your worship to Deputy Mayor Huntley, we have not requested anymore. What we have done, and as you had pointed out on Monday at council, any of the funds that were unspent from the previous years were used and reprofiled with the idea that anything that wasn't spent by the end of this year would be rolled over. And in fact, council made a decision to approve that approach. As the mayor had indicated, the 25,000 for this year, 10 of that will be used, 15 will be rolled over. The total of that was a little over 60,000. That's what council made a decision on Monday about.
So in my understanding, and I very well could be wrong about this, this is the 44,000 is remaining funds that are not to be utilized. They're remainders from previous years of not utilized funds. So what we're in essence doing is combining the remainder funds into one reserve for CIP. And because of our annual commitment of 25,000 with a remaining balance in the reserves of 49,000, we can fully fund almost 2 years of CIP programs or eligibility programs out of the existing reserve. So there's no need to levy for it again. So we will have one CIP reserve of $49,718, 25 of which will be eligible as it is year over year for the CIP programs. Does that make sense? Is that correct, Mr. Cully?
Yes, your worship, that's correct.
Other questions? Councilor Brent?
Through the chair, yes, I was just gonna ask about the $10,000 we did on Monday for iron equipment and whether that would change any of these numbers at all by 10,000.
So that was so you got that answer, right? The 15,000. Yeah, okay. Perfect. Okay, no problem. Mr. Edgerton, would you like to speak to the two Mr. Hack projects that we discussed?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We discussed this year about the bell restoration, and I think seeing as the bell came from downtown. Oh, down there. I think seeing as the bell came from downtown Millbrook, and we're gonna have a new park down there sometime, maybe that we should be working with Parks and Recreation about putting the bell down there where more people can see it than they could up here at the municipal office. So we will be inviting you to one of our meetings to discuss that. Thank you.
So in light of that, there's not a need for the Mr. Hack committee to receive that funding in this year because the park is not going to be built in 2024. But Mr. Allison, you've heard that. So we're going to remove that from the capital budget line because of the consideration to be integrated to the historical element that is the Village of Millbrook Bell, the portion of the historical fixtures in the park. So you can work with Mr. Hack's committee on that, and then that will more than likely probably come from Parks and Rec budgets in future years, the park, and probably not the Mr. Hack committee asks. So that is, if we can have a motion, then I guess to remove that from the capital budget. I'll look to Councillor Edgerton, Councillor Natchop, all in favor. That is approved. Congratulations, council. We've officially cut our first capital item. There you go. All right. Do you want to speak to the porch light program as well? I know we had a discussion about that.
Yeah, the porch light, we're just had a discussion about that, and I'd like to go back to the committee and talk to them. I can't see as that is historical, the porch light thing. Maybe we'll have to put that over to some other department or however they want to handle that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I asked Councillor Edgerton a bit about the project because council hasn't received any details. And I think there was some concerning elements, but also I'm just not sure what has been discussed at this point has fully been vetted or considered with regards to other implications of the program. But also in speaking and reviewing the terms of reference, I just don't feel like it's really a heritage component. It's more of a community safety component that could be from some other committee for consideration. So I think in that conversation, I think I asked if this was something that was an urgent matter that needed to be in this capital budget, but without details from council and without an understanding of more about the program, my suggestion was that we also remove that from the capital budget as well. And Councillor Edgerton didn't voice any opposition to that because there's not a lot of details that the committee's also received. So I'll make that motion. If anyone else wants to, if we can get a seconder, Councillor Byrne, all in favor to remove that as well. Any discussion before the vote? Sure. Deputy Mayor Hunley.
Through your chair, I did want to just clarify one thing that you alluded to there was that it's not a heritage event, but Mr. Hack is also revitalization. Right, so any improvement to the community in that sense is revitalization. So I think it does kind of fall in that purview. I don't know the program specifically. I'd hate to see it being thrown out because it's not heritage when that purpose of that committee isn't just heritage, it's also revitalization. So thank you.
Yeah, fair point. Absolutely. In my understanding, and Councillor Edgerton, correct me if I'm wrong, if you recall, I'm trying to remember the name of the traditional program where there was a certain sign that you could put in your window if you were a safe home, Neighborhood Watch, correct? So this is very much in tune with that program. But my concern is that there isn't, from my understanding, any nuanced color to the porch light to be left on or any differentiating characteristics that might differentiate it from other porch lights just being on.
Through you, Chair, I got no problem with scratching the program with more details or whatever. I just wanted to make clear that the committee is more than just heritage. That's it.
Absolutely. Well, Ms. Hurley.
I just wanted to clarify that I understand that you as council have a representation or a space on each of these committees. However, we also have staff here as well. So if you are looking for clarification on any of the items, etc., we are here to assist you in any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Hurley. I think we're okay in this regard, but we'll definitely take that into consideration for future. There is a motion on the floor. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? That is approved. Very good. We can move that. There's any other questions with regards to planning and building ECDev while we're here? If not, we can go on to the next department, which is parks and facilities. Ms. Hurley, back to you.
Under Parks and Facilities, the items that have been identified for consideration in the 2024 budget are the community center furnishing and fixtures. That's a rollover from the CMCC. We have Millbrook Valley Trail Bridge and Boardwalk repairs. The Parks and Recreation Plan Phase 3, and just to clarify, Phase 3 includes the concept drawings and designs out of a recommendation that you'll hear in December, as well as council's direction to carry out a visionary exercise for the new park where the current Millbrook Arena is located. The other items are the Old Millbrook School, which is a 2020 ICIP grant that we received. And as you can see, we continue to contribute to that recommendation for those items. We also have the Millbrook Arena 2020 ICIP grant approved again. Those are grants that we received from the province pertaining to works to take place at the Millbrook Arena as well as the Old Millbrook School. And our contribution is identified in there each year. We have up until, I think, 2026, I believe, to continue to fund that. We're currently looking for clarification and possible program change regarding the Millbrook Arena, given the fact that council has already made a direction to remove the Millbrook Arena. So we are actually talking to the province about reallocating those funds for the new potential project. Transfer to reserve is for the demolition of that Millbrook Arena. Again, that was a direction of council. So we're putting monies away into a reserves, not carrying out that project this year, but certainly putting the monies into reserves to potentially do it in 2025. Transfer to reserves regarding splash pad / water feature. Again, we've already have 90K in reserves for that project. That project was actually identified and a portion of that project has already been designed back in 2019 with the CMCC lands. When we did the arena for the CMCC, we actually put the infrastructure in the ground to be able to have a water park feature adjacent to the playground, outside playground area. In addition to that, we have Old Millbrook School play shade structure. It's again, looking at 28.5 for that. The current partner that we have on that's coming forward for that play structure is the Early On, and they're contributing $8,000 to this project. Then we have the HVAC unit, municipal office. As you might remember, last year, we identified the replacement of HVAC at the municipal office here. We try to do it over a couple of years, so it's not one big cost to the municipality. So this is the final replacement for the one last unit that needs to be replaced here at the municipal office. Then we have transfer to reserves, which is the 2014 Dodge Ram, which is a replacement. And we also continue with the transfer to reserves for the Olympia Ice resurfacer. And Mr. Allison is available if we have any questions, council.
One question I had just for a point of clarity is with regards to the water feature splash pad. With the 160,000 contribution this year, I was under the impression that, I mean, because we have design work done, there's a potential for that to be actually installed over the next, it may not be completed this year, it might take an additional year, but that if the budget is approved, that would be done. And I was just had a question with regards to the future purchase date being 2026 in the purple, as you've located. I just wanted a clarity on that. It might be finished by then, but the actual purchase date would probably be maybe even in this year. Is that not correct? Correct. Yeah. Not 2026. Mr. Allen.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll let Mr. Allison speak to that item because we did actually have it identified, pushed out before he reached out to get some harder costs and actually delivery dates. So he has that information to report on.
to you, Mayor. I did reach out and we got a quote for 2024 installation of the original design. The quote right now for 2024 is $226,483. At this time, they do have orders coming in quite frequently this time of year. At this time, though, they have an 8 to 10 week installation, so we could be looking at a spring installation 2024.
So we can just scratch that date or change that alteration in the next iteration so that we can expect that at not 2026, 2024. Thank you for correcting me. Other questions, members of council? Councilor Byrne. Go to you next, Councilor Richard.
Through the chair. So I'm just curious, the grant monies for the old Millbrook School and the Millbrook Arena, they've been approved, but they actually have not been received yet, so they don't show up in any of the funds or accounts or anything else. They're strictly on the books to receive once we do the work.
Yeah, correct. The ICIP there's a commitment for those funds for the works identified, and it can evolve, and we're going to see what exactly it can change to. But yeah, they're actually not released until the final construction. So we have to have the monies in reserve to do the entirety of the project, and then we're reimbursed for that money, but it has been committed to at this point. Edgerton.
And through you, Mr. Chair, on this year, Olympia, that's the surfacer thing. I see where you're putting money away for that. How many years would we get out of one of them units, and roughly what's the cost of one?
Through your mayor to Councillor Edgerton. The ice resurfacer, from a trade-in value, 8 to 10 years is where you get the best trade-in value on an ice resurfacer. The one we have purchased right now, I believe, was around $120,000. So it depending on use, how busy you are, hours, they can last, depending on the maintenance too, they can last 15, 20 years, but you're going to get your best trade-in value around 8 to 10 years.
And in addition to that specific item, I'm somewhat familiar because it was fully funded from, or mostly funded from, 2 sponsors on a 10-year agreement and commitment. So there, again, because we are identifying it as cost of replacement over 10 years, we need to garner that money. But that sponsorship agreement for the 2 builders on that development does expire at a 10-year horizon. So that will be another opportunity as well. And it might, I know the best traded value is, 8 to 10 years, but if it's on that 10th year of actual usage, then it would save us the cost of having to reapply the sponsorship components to the existing facility or the newer vehicle and then redo them over 1 year. So not that that's an exorbitant cost, but there is a commitment in place from the township to maintain or uphold that sponsorship agreement for the $100,000 to the 2 components. So definitely something to consider, but again, we have to budget for it for the meantime as well. But an opportunity. Councillor Natchop.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, similar question to Mr. Edgerton. Chris, what's the life expectancy for an HVAC unit?
Through your mayor to Councillor Natchop, it depends on the unit. Are you speaking of the units on the township office or? Yeah, so the units on the township office, I don't have the actual year on them now, but they are over 20 years old. So we are getting into replacing like motors on them and circuit boards. And so this, we put in a program to replace all of them. This is the last unit that needs to be replaced, and then all the units will be new on this building.
Other questions? Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair, just for clarity, I might have this wrong, but I thought way back in the day when we put up the new rink, we traded in the old Zamboni we had, or ice resurfacer, or whatever you wanted to call it, as a portion of the purchase of the new one that we bought in whatever year that was.
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Byrne. I do believe it was traded in. I don't have the numbers on what the value was that we got on it right now.
Councillor Natchop.
Through you, Chair, this would be, I guess, a question directly for you, Mayor. In regards to the shade structure, so we're looking at the 20,500. That wouldn't be taking into consideration the $7,000 rollover that you had suggested previously to to Carla when she was discussing about the library.
Yeah, obviously, so I don't think the expectation is that some of the 7,000 will be spent, but the rollover amount could be directed towards this and keep the sustainability, because there isn't a full replacement for the IT hardware yet. And that's sort of what we just found out with regards to the overview, but there is plans to rejuvenate the inventory of computers for people to use on a yearly basis to amortize it. Also, so we're not having to replace all of them every 10 years or 4 years rather. So I think the expectation is that in the absence of having to make those purchases, and also the fact that the 2 iPads were able to be otherwise funded, that were identified could be funded through the grant, there's an opportunity that there might be some rollover monies in the capital that we could put to this, and that way it can sustain, the library can be a partner in that project, but also sustain consistency throughout their capital budget for next year. So it's, instead of a rollover towards other increasing lines that are already existing in the current budget, it would just be rolled over towards dedicated to that capital project. So that our portion of the 20.5 could be somewhat reduced depending on what we find out in January. Yeah. Other questions? If not, we can move on to protective services while the chief is still here.
Just before we do that, just 2 notes I'd like to make. One is your forecasted budgets where we're putting reserves in is attached beyond the pages that you have in front of you regarding capital. So in your binders, if you are looking at forecasted purchases, Councillor Edgerton asked about when you purchase items, those items are identified on those subsequent forms. Okay, they're folded up, but just for you to be aware that those documents are there where we're putting monies into reserves. And the other component to that is one thing that we haven't touched on, and maybe this is something we'll touch on. I believe our chairman might touch on this as well at the very end. But we do have what was not included in here. Please note that we do make any effort that we can to find grants or funding opportunities within our capital budget. So it brought to mind when we were talking about the actual splash pad or water features. That is something that we do believe there could be funding opportunity for. However, we will not know that until we actually make the application. But I wanted it noted that anytime we as staff will always search to see if we can find any funding, any grants, anything that opportunity to offset some of these costs. It's just that we will not know that at this time. So we fully fund everything, but if anything changes and we do get grants for it, we do report to council on that. So to continue into onto the public services section, we have the fire hall number 1, which is a rollover. We have our SCBA units, again, ongoing rollover, bunker gear, fire hoses, and then we have a list of transfer to reserves. Protected Services has a variety of them listed here. I don't think I need to name them all. They are here. And then at the bottom, we have a replacement of a 1989 Chevy. And we have a transfer to reserves for 2000 Ford F550 rescue truck. Again, our fire chief is here and he's available to answer any questions that council might have regarding protected services, please.
Yep, thank you for that. And yes, as you can see in those, there are pages for all of this. Is one of those areas where there's obviously a significant important fleet to manage, and there is a 10-year forecast in there where you can follow along with regards to the purple components. They just show you where we're at to date and where the proposed purchase date is. That's what FPD means. And yeah, but questions for members of staff and the chief while he's here. Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair, I'm just curious what grass fire the unit is dedicated to that, or what is special about that pickup truck? I just curious.
Through the mayor to Councillor Burns, I think that's a historical name that we can probably freshen up, but what it is a pickup style truck that was used multi-purposely. And what we're looking for, this truck in question is like Ms. Hurley indicated earlier, it's a 1989 pickup truck. It's a single cab truck, and with our growing complement of firefighters, we're needing additional rooms to transport them to emergency scenes. That's one aspect of this purchase of the truck. That'll be one enhancement that will be made with this purchase. It'd be a club cabs truck, okay? And the second one is, it'll be used for definitely grass fires, but as a service truck for, different emergency responses.
Thank you, Chief. Other questions, members of council? Seeing none. Thank you, Chief, for those answers. Ms. Hurley, if you want to move on to Public Works, Roads and Environmental Services.
The roads and environmental services, it's one of our large budgets as well. It is identified starting at pre-engineering costs, Public Works and Operations Center, fuel system monitoring system, Sire Line, surface treatment. There's Sire Line, Stewart, Hutchison. We have Larmer Line East, we have Larmer Line West, Zion Line, Slurry Seal, one of our favorite projects, as you know. We love the Slurry Seal project. We have a roads needs study, intersection replacement, Brookside Street reconstruction, streetlight replacement rollover, sign reflectivity equipment, sidewalks, crack scale, crossroad culvert on Lammer, additional tandem and replacement of a JD grader and grader provision items. And again, Mr. Hancock is here to answer any questions that council might have.
Questions, members of council? Councillor Edgerton and then Councillor Byrne.
To you, Mr. Mayor, to the roads department. See down here, street light replacement, and why in all these new subdivisions are we requesting that the developers put in street lights when half the people don't want them? And why is most of the township paying for street lights in the odd little subdivision? Like, why are we doing that?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Edgerton. First of all, our urban design guidelines and new subdivisions require street light as part of the design, and the developers do incorporate a form of decorative lighting in the subdivisions, and that is in part because of liability, but it's in part also because that's the standard that we're building to in both the rural and urban subdivision. Developers pay for that. It becomes a part of your infrastructure. The budget line here is an upgrade. It's a carryover for the most part. You'll see in the budget line, it was a carryover for the street lighting along County Road 10. And we've had, I think, requests for people walking on County Road 10 on the sidewalks and with traffic on County Road 10 that we try to get the lighting up to Fallis Line and then ultimately up to, as the new subdivision builds up past the municipal office. So that's our project that's included in this budget line. But the requirement for street lighting in subdivisions is our standard requirement in our urban design guidelines, and it is the standard in the industry.
Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair, it was in regard to the same topic. If we have to do that, I'm really impressed with the banners that the Millbrook Legion put up for the fallen veterans. Is there any thought or possibility that if we're going to stick up more streetlights, decorative or whatever, that those stands are made in such a fashion so they can support something similar in all the subdivisions that are going forward? As I don't know whether we're going to continue that program, but something similar probably will come along.
I think if I can, while Mr. Hancock confirms some elements of it, I think the intention is to standardize the street lights throughout the village of Millbrook and the township, so that there is the opportunity to affix and add on the same things throughout the entirety of the lights, so that there is, as the Legion continues to support and get more interest. I know they've seen a significant uptick since they've been erected, which is fantastic. I'm sure there's a municipal commitment to keep putting up as many banners as we can find. The main focus will be along the core areas of the core arterial roads to get the exposure as optimum as possible. But I don't think that's with regards to this replacement. But my understanding is that there is a standard, as Mr. Hancock's alluded to, so that the opportunity to affix anything, if you're able to do it one, you're able to do it on all. But you want to speak to that, Mr. Hancock?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you to Councilor Byrne. First of all, the Parks Department looks after the banners for the majority, and they look after the arms in the downtown area. But our standard streetlight system will accommodate arms on them. So It is an item and certainly Chris Allison's here to comment on, but the banners are, you know, they're a great addition. I think we understand that. So there is the opportunity to always add.
Mr. Allison, I'll let you fill in that gap.
Through you, Mayor, to Councilor Byrne. As for the banners, they're just retrofit brackets that we purchased, put on. Banners are on those brackets.
So there's no issue with regards to installing. Okay, thank you. Councilor Byrne, follow up?
On that note, then, if a new subdivision is being created anywhere, the builder or the developer puts in those streetlights to our spec, is there the chance to have that addition incorporated when they're paying for it rather than we pay for it later on to be added?
To Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Byrne, there's a standard decorative street light that we use in subdivisions such as Tower Hill South, Tower Hill North. I think it's it's a case that you have to understand where you want to put the banners. And it's not in the norm that we would have brackets without some program in place, and that's something that can be looked at. The lights in the rural areas are referred to as a Cobra head. They're a concrete pole. They're not as set up to handle the arms on them, but the decorative lights are. I just got a note from Chris Allison saying the retrofit's $35, so it's not substantial dollars. And we do make sure that our standard will allow for them. So we do have that.
Ms. Hurley?
Just for clarification, the developer, with regards to Mr. Hancock, maybe I got the feeling that the question was that the township is paying for the lights within the development area. The answer to that is no, the developer pays for that. So just for clarification, and as for the banners work in the commercial area. They're not necessarily something that we currently have in the residential. If that's something that council wants to consider down the road, that's something that we would bring a report on. But right now, the commercial banners, just like the flower baskets, that kind of thing is through the commercial area. It's not necessarily in a residential area.
Yeah, and in addition, this is just year one. So as we continue to get more and more throughout the community, we'll find more and more places for them for sure. I think there's a commitment to do that. Absolutely. Other questions? The one element that Ms. Hurley kind of stole my thunder with regards to is some of the alternative sources of funding. One of the most pertinent and significant things that I think I spoke to some of you about in our informal meetings is you'll notice here that in the slurry seal program that Ms. Hurley had mentioned is near and dear to our hearts. There's $111,500 from the CCBF. So that CCBF is what was formerly known as the gas tax. So that is an annual source of funding that we receive from the feds with regards to that needs and requires to exclusively be invested in road infrastructure. That confirmation, so you get disbursements of that and confirmations of the disbursements over a 4-year horizon. 2023 was the last of the 4 years that we received confirmation of what our contribution would be. And I believe, maybe Mr. Hancock could confirm, I believe our total allotment last year was $292,000. So what's been identified here from $111,500 is an amount that was remaining left over in the reserve from the gas tax fund. So we expect that there will be a significant contribution from the gas tax that should be utilized or could at least be utilized at the discretion of council, either in its totality or in at least a significant portion this year. I don't think there's been inconsistent trends in it, but it's traditionally over a 4-year horizon is trending upwards with regards to and I'm not even sure exactly all the metrics that the feds apply to it, but with a growing population and growing road infrastructure, you can expect that it seems linear that there would be some sort of increased revenues towards this. So maybe 300,000, but I think a conservative estimate would be around a $260,000 contribution, which would be, you know, theoretically equivalent to about 2% of the tax levy increase. So we will probably, if I understand, that number is usually confirmed in the next 2 weeks or so, usually in December, but maybe there's been some delays with a lot of things recently, so it might not be until January. Hopefully that number will be reflected in January at the next budget meeting, but you can expect that of all the things, and I think we'll provide, one of the purposes of this meeting is to provide staff with direction as to where to come back and what to do with it in regards to the next budget meeting. But that is one significant piece of monies that we should and traditionally do know that we will have access to in this year that we don't yet. So expect that there will be over a $200,000 contribution that's not reflected in this. And I just wanted to confirm that this $111,500 is not a potential new source of revenue. It's money that was left over from previous year's contributions from the gas tax. So just to put that in everyone's mind, so don't be surprised when you see that come in. We just don't put it in before we know what it is. Other questions with regards to the Public Works, Roads and Environmental Services capital budget? Seeing none. That takes us through the entire summary of the capital. So we have plenty of time left to have a more formal discussion, and we do have to get to providing direction. Ms. Hurley, you'd like to make a comment?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we do have water and wastewater capital, please, if we can go to that section, sorry.
Absolutely. That was the end of the capital pertaining to the levy, I should have said. Let me correct myself, Ms. Hurley.
Through you, Chair to Council and the public, we do have the items that are identified for water wastewater in front of you, which is your 2024. The mayor is correct. It's to do with the bylaw and it's affected in that. And we have Mr. Hancock here that could answer to any of the questions. They are divided pertaining to water distribution system and wastewater collection system. Again, very similar format as what the requested purchase is. If there's any rollovers and the wastewater reserve where we're drawing the funds from.
Thank you, Ms. Hurley. Questions with regards to the water wastewater capital budget? Councillor Edgerton, and then I'll come to Councillor Byrne.
Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Hancock, I see in here the removal of the old standpipe. I presume that's the one down in Millbrook that they drained. Why are we taking it down? Why don't we utilize it in the system?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Edgerton, number one, when we did the review for the new standpipe that happens to be at our municipal office, the topography or height of that standpipe did not work for the pressure system in the municipality. So it was elected, one, there's the age of the structure, number one, and number two, that it didn't provide the pressure required primarily for fire protection. So it was agreed when we built the new one, that one was declared excess and would ultimately be torn down. So we have put the funds in the budget this year for the removal. And it will not work in that location for the development as we move to the north in Millbrook.
Follow-up question?
To you, Mr. Mayor. I do believe on top of that standpipe, and I think the contract is still in place. We have a phone company with a tower on top of there bringing in a fair decent income every year. What happens to that?
Through Mr. Mayor, Councillor Edgerton, and we do have a lease agreement with Rogers Cable. It does amount to about a revenue of just averaging around 10,000 per year. We are presently looking at relocating them to our new standpipe at the municipal office.
Follow-up question on the same subject. Oh, sorry, Councillor Byrne, I cut you off there. Go ahead.
Through the chair, on that same topic though, if that tower had the possibility to be raised, like extended upward, would that not alleviate a lot of the pressure problems and the distribution portions of that? Is that cheaper or possible to do in comparison to building another standpipe farther up the County Road 10?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Byrne, number one, you're dealing with a structure that's quite aged and it's a steel tank structure and it's not possible to be raised. So that's one option that's not there. And number two, the age of the structure, really, it was put in place in the 70s, as the term I would use. I'm not sure of the actual year, but it is an age structure and it has a concrete base that is deteriorated. So we had it reviewed and so it's not possible to raise the number two. It is slated for removal.
So on that same, while we're all still on the same subject, I guess my question is, I understand it doesn't serve its traditional purpose any longer, because again, because of those, I think 10-decade-old decisions now, growth has been allocated to the north and to the west of County Road 10. So it's not gonna, we couldn't establish a whole distribution system to incorporate that to take over the distribution in the village of Millbrook. That would be extraordinarily costly and entirely tax levy funded or water rate funded. So that's an exorbitant cost. In addition to that, because of it growth related being up at County Road 10 near here, it is a growth related expense and will be mostly DC eligible. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the funding, as we noted in the master servicing study, while looking at a new standpipe would be a development charge funded item. The new standpipe that was built behind our office here it was cited there primarily for the Millbrook residents plus the development around our office. Now we're looking at further to the north as per the growth plan. So the existing standpipe would not work pressure-wise in those areas.
So then the non-infrastructure related question is, from a nostalgia perspective, is there some sort of legal exposure that is the justification to remove it versus just maintain its decommissioned nostalgia part of the horizon? I mean, you don't see many water towers anymore that are being constructed in the same sort of nuanced way. And I think people identify coming into the village by seeing that specific tower. Is there a need to incur the expense to fully demolish and remove versus just decommissioning and closing off for perpetuity and going from that regard? Is that something that's been considered?
Mr. Mayor, I think and this is noted in the RVA report, it does carry with it as a large liability. It is a structure quite high. It's sitting very close to private properties. So it was recommended through the original plan that it be removed at some point. So we've just scheduled to come down because I think the deterioration is going forward and the liability that runs with it coming crashing down is probably not going to be good for the municipality. So our position is that we should remove it as soon as possible.
And does the 250,000, does that encompass the entirety of the cost of removal and demolition?
That is our estimate at this time. We'll of course call a tender on and report back to council.
Thank you. Councilor Byrne, then Councilor Richard.
Through the chair, and completely out of my scope of anything, but I travel down to places like St. Jacobs and see restaurants and stuff built in old silos that were put up well before the 70s. And they're usable and they're attractive to some crowds, not particularly me, but they work. The other thing I'm thinking of is why couldn't it be an observation tower tied into what you want to do at the old Millbrook School? That maybe somehow there could be a link between that and the whatever's planned there, that you get to go and look out over. We built the CN Tower and gave it away. Why couldn't we do something along? Is it possible? I don't even know. It's way out of my realm.
Mr. Hancock.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councilor Byrne, I think I'd stress the liability that would run with that type of idea, particularly when you're having pedestrians visit a structure that's structurally failing. I think that's the wrong move. And I think that you're just bringing liability in the face of us. And I think we have to look at it and say, no, this structure has had its lifetime. It should be removed. And possible other uses is the standpipe is been pointed out by our consultant firm that it is structurally declining and should be removed.
Councilor Edgerton.
Yeah, when that tower was working down there, and that the water pressure downtown was 100 PSI when the tower was right full at where Tinney's car lot was. I just wonder now, and maybe the fire chief can tell me, do we have the same flow of water for fire protection downtown from this standpipe here as we had from the other one up there? Because now the water has to come back down.
through the mayor to Councillor Edgerton. The hydrant that you're talking about at the old Tinny lot is still has to be gated back, so I'm not as sure exactly of the pressure. I believe you mentioned 100 pounds. I think it's sitting around the 90 some pounds. So it's the testing that's done through the wastewater division. They do sampling throughout the village every year. They provide us with the reports. That's a requirement of the fire underwriter survey. So they do sampling throughout that, and they do maintenance and upkeep on those hydrants. So the pressure is every bit as good as it was. It's still, they're blue. The NFPA color is still blue within the village, which is the best water pressure that you can receive under the NFPA rating.
Thank you, Chief. Other questions, members of council? Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, I apologize. The restoration of well 2, is that the well we did not too long ago, or is that planned for one of the other wells down in Millbrook?
To Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Byrne, that is the third and remaining well. We've done 2 to date, so that is the last well to be done.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. Other questions? Councilor Edgerton?
One down here, you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Hancock on the wastewater system. I see here where we have $50,000 here for sewer flow monitoring. What's the big cost for this sewer flow monitoring? For $50,000.
Through Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Edgerton, sewer monitoring is generally what we're trying to do is understand where we're having the worst infiltration in our system. So we're trying to track the flows in the pipes. So it's actually in manholes, and it's a monitoring system that requires some manual reading out of manholes, and it's ongoing. Now we are looking at doing that in-house with some equipment if possible, but it is flows to understand how rainfalls are affecting our flows in the pipes. So that is the program. The cost we've identified was to have it done by a consultant, but we may be able to do something with flow monitoring meters and actually do some work in-house if possible.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. Other questions, Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, so that sump pump program, would that tie into that as well as the infiltration of regular water into the sewage system? And is there some plan to help the residents somehow divert stuff that might be going into the sewage system?
Again, Mr. Mayor, through you to Councilor Byrne, yes, the program, the sump pump disconnection program to sanitary sewers, that is a program that we're kicking off for the most part in 2024. It is to try and redirect the water from weepers away from your sanitary sewer and then into other outlets. And it is a program that to help the residents redirect it and disconnect from the sanitary outlet.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. Councilor Edgerton?
And to you, Mr. Mayor. This, again, in this sump pump collection, I do believe it's illegal for people to pump their sump pumps into the sewage system. So why is the taxpayer spending $50,000 to tell them to get their pipes disconnected?
2 items there. One, it's just to clarify, it's not a tax dollar. This is a water wastewater user fee budget, but just on that point, what we have is a number of illegal connections. So what it requires is along with building bylaw, you're quite right. There is a bylaw that was passed that says you are not to dump your sump pumps into the sanitary. Some have done it. It's been in place for a number of years, so we have to go through the individual houses, have them disconnected, and we're trying to do this with some public relations that they have an alternate place to put their sump pump water. But you're quite right, it's not presently allowed under the bylaw. We just want to have the inspections, make sure everybody's following the bylaw. So it will require some visits, inspections to the individual houses.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. So lots to consider there. I'm still not sold on the standpipe project, but I'm gonna have a conversation with you more on that subject, I think, between now and January to see if there's other alternatives. And I think Councillor Byrne had some interesting suggestions, but I understand it is a liability issue. But if certain private proprietors wanted to take on that liability and not the township, then it's removed to us. But we'll definitely follow up more on that, and we have 2 more budget meetings to discuss that. Other questions with regards to water wastewater? If not, if we're done with this, I'm gonna go back to the report itself. Any questions with regards to wastewater? I just want to make sure we give everyone time. Good. We're just gonna go all the way back to the report. Yeah, so we're gonna go back to that too, Carly. Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, the first page with regard. So there are recommendations with regards to the report. We don't actually have the presentation, so some of the vernacular, we didn't have Kimberly's formal deck, so we went through the report as is and through the capital specifically. So we're not going to be receiving the presentation, but we're going to receive the report itself. But what we do need to do is establish some parameters with regard to direction for staff to take on consideration for the January budget presentation. I alluded to a couple of the factors that with regards to the gas tax, we'll have that clarity. What is it, the CCFBF now? Is that what it's called? Okay, so we'll have clarity on that, but we do, I think usually the traditional, what we do is here is council can provide staff with some sort of generic direction as to where we would like them to go back. Obviously finalize the expenses that are coming in to have those reflected so we know where we're firmly standing, and then give them direction today as to where we would like the levy to go and give them direction to provide us options to how to get there. Obviously the gas tax will have an improvement. We're probably not going to know much about the grants, unfortunately, in January. It'd be nice if we did, but that's usually an ongoing throughout the year process. But open discussion now with regards to the totality of the budget. Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair. I'd like to see this budget come in somewhere around the 3.5 mark. I don't know how anybody else feels about that, but that's, I think, somewhere between 3 and 4 is probably fair, and split the difference at 3.5. I'd say I'd like to see what happens when we do the once was formerly called the gas tap applied, and then the remainder come out of the asset replacement just to balance it out at this point. Obviously taking into account the 10,000 that we pulled out of it, which is, going to change the budget by a tenth of a decimal place or whatever. But that would be my direction as it's coming back next time for still yet another draft. But that'll give us a little bit more perspective on where we sit with the asset replacement and with the grant formerly known as gas tax. Thank you.
Councilor Nacho.
Through you, Chair, I concur with Deputy Mayor Huntley. I think 3.5 would be a great target to look for, not to exceed 4% if possible. Thank you.
To you, Mr. Mayor, I also concur with him that we keep our budget down around the 3.5 to maximum of 4. Thank you.
Any comment, Councilor Byrne?
Always through the chair. I'd be remiss if I didn't emphasize what I hear so often. And I get the pressures and all the other stuff that goes into causing costs to go up. But the residents that live here that pay the taxes, they're experiencing this on top of all the other levels of government doing the same thing on a regular basis with very little increases to their pensions or their fixed incomes or any of that. One thing that I would note, I don't know, 111,000 represents 1% of the increase. One of the things in the notes here is the demolition of the old Millbrook Arena. I don't see any real reason liability wise or whatever why that has to be on this budget. I know there's a small group of people that are adamant that it needs to be tore down, but parking has been an issue and has been highlighted in the last couple of weeks in Millbrook. And that whole area along the dam serves as a very useful parking spot for a lot of things that happen in Millbrook, including the vendors and the actual merchants along the road. So that in itself represents almost 1% of this levy. So I'd be remiss if we didn't try to get the budget to zero. The CEO has already told me that's not an option, but it certainly is what most of the residents of the community tell me. Thank you.
Yep, and just for clarity, Councillor Byrne, with regards, so there is a binding motion of council that to move forward with the demolition, so that is the direction of council that's being followed. The 100,000 is not the totality of the cost. It will not be demolished for that this year. It is putting towards the potential future costs of removal that we keep finding new little kernels of gems for, whether it's noxious fumes, mold, or asbestos and other contaminants that require that cost of demolition to go up, but we're also seeking to see what, if any, of the components of the ICIP might be able to be directed towards that as well. So that's again, a Kimberly question that I can't provide any clarity on. I know she was having a call last week. I don't know if we got clarity, but we definitely started or continued the conversation about the future iteration there. There's no intentions to change anything. I think that the parking is definitely, I know Councillor Natchoff can speak to this as well, because we've had many conversations about parking downtown as pertaining to his business and the others that he speaks with a bit more frequently than I do. There is, I think the issue with regards to parking is that we are going to need whatever the demolition and or reconstruction of that park needs to provide for the demand and the increasing demand of parking for the village of Millbrook for sure. That needs to be a priority, but there is no design as of yet as to what that composition is, or no binding design yet. I know there's lots of theoretical ones and that are out in circulation, but there's been none that have been completed as of yet, as that's a part of phase 3 of the component of the Parks and Rec update. So we'll move forward in that regard as well. As per the comments, I think what my suggestion was going to be that is kind of consistent is that we suggest that staff, the direction to staff be that they come back with opportunities for the budget to be below 4%. And then that gives us the opportunity to really, grind or file down the nails a little bit more to get, if we want to reach that 3.5%, if we give staff the direction to get to 4, well, usually the opportunity, once we know what the gas tax is, that might get us a bit of the way there, but we also have yet to do anything with regards to the asset management replacement reduction. It's not very uncommon, if ever, I think that we put away 100%, but it is an important component. As we see, we're drawing 600,000 from it this year, but we are scheduled right now to put away, $2.7 million, which is a significant amount that is currently funded by the levy too. And it's not money that we need tomorrow. It's money that we need for the future. So I think that is obviously going to be a consideration where once we get staff give us the final details to get below 4%, well, that is going to be, it's council's decision. We need to have some room to decide exactly how far below 4% we would like to go and how to get there. So I'm okay if that's okay or consistent with the motions or the discussion. Then I think the motion would be, and I'm going to look to the clerk, that we receive the first draft of the budget report for discussion and education purposes, not from Ms. Pope, but staff and self, and that the direction to staff be to come back in January with a revised budget demonstrating opportunities to reduce the levy to below 4%. Is that sufficient? Is that clear? So you're willing to make that motion then, Deputy Mayor Huntley? Looking for a seconder, Councillor Natchoff, all in favor? That is approved. That is the components of the budget meeting today. There is no general business. The confirming bylaw is bylaw number 2023-84, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the special council meeting held this day, December 7th, 2023, be read a first, second, and third time, passed this 7th day of December, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto. Moved by Councillor Edgerton, Councillor Natchoff, all in favor? That is approved. Lastly, motion to adjourn the meeting. Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councillor Edgerton, all in favor? That is approved. Thanks, everyone. We'll look forward to seeing you in January, but we do have our next